Good morning. Thank you so much for all of you to be here today to join us for this historic bill signing. Naturally, we have some acknowledgments that I would like to, if you will bear with me. It's not a short list, but it's an important list. First of all, I want to thank the amazing coalition of women, student, reproductive rights, LGBT, sexual assault, and domestic violence advocacy groups who've joined us today, and providers who have worked tirelessly to ensure that this legislation was passed. I want to thank our host, NYU President John Sexton, who is with us today, and as my prerogative, next I will recognize my assembly colleagues. Many of you are here, and many of you had a hand in your input and support. So in no particular order other than it appears to be alphabetical. Assembly members Carmen Arroyo, Rodneyce Bachat, Maritza Davia, Aileen Gunther, Deputy Speaker Erlene Hooper, Assembly Member Latoya Joyner, Brian Kavanaugh, Guillermo Linares, Steve Otis, Roxanne Bachat, Roxanne Prasad, I'm sorry, sitting next to her sister, Linda Rosenthal, Joanne Simon, Aravella Simotis, David Weprin, do the Senate too. And I'm going to step on Senator Flanagan's lines and introduce our Senate colleagues as well. Adriano Espaillat, Brad Hoylman, Toby Stavisky, the Dean of New York Congressional Delegation, Charles Rangel, the Superintendent of the New York State Police, Joseph D'Amico, Greg Floyd, President of the Teamsters 237, Barbara Bowen, President of PSC CUNY, and we have someone with us today who is a special individual because she embodies what this legislation is all about. Her name is Abigail. She is a survivor of a sexual assault that occurred on a private college campus in New York State. She joined so many other survivors whose stories became the face of this effort. The bravery of students like Abigail is what made this law possible. And on behalf of the legislature, the governor, I would like us all to thank her personally for being here. I want to thank everyone for joining us today to mark this important day for New York and for all college students across our great state. We're here at this juncture because of Governor Cuomo's determination to address a serious problem on campuses across our state, and indeed across the nation. We have heard too often the complaints of many students that their desire to attend college and to get an education has been marred by the crime of sexual assault. Many students have stepped forward only to have the institutions that they believed in be uncomfortable or incapable of properly handling their complaint. And we have many of those individuals with us today, many of whom raised their voice, lobbied their legislators, and they all deserve recognition and our thanks for their focus and their encouragement to achieve this goal today. We join with them to send a message loud and clear. Enough is enough. Today, we take a great step forward to protect students across the state. This legislation will clarify communication and ensure that students and institutions alike understand the new ground rules that will protect all students on all campuses across the state of New York. Let me thank the governor again for making this issue a central priority in this year's legislative session. And I want to thank again my colleagues for all of their support as we moved through the negotiations to bring this to fruition. I'd be remiss if I didn't also applaud the governor for the inclusion in this legislation of funding for local rape crisis centers. These centers are vital providers in ensuring that victims of sexual assault on campuses have a full range of options as they seek counseling and assistance. Rape crisis centers have always played a significant role throughout their years, and it is through their partnership and this legislation that New York once again is providing the kind of leadership on a serious societal problem that will offer a new way forward for the entire nation. I want to thank you for your attention, and it is now my pleasure to introduce Senate Majority Leader John Flanagan.
Thank you very much, and good morning. And let me start by thanking Assemblywoman Glick and all of our legislative colleagues who have joined us here today. And it's, you don't have the same vantage point if you're sitting there and looking up here. During your legislative career, every now and then it comes together. Every now and then things get done the right way. So as our colleagues are introduced, and as they attend this type of event, both Senate and Assembly, Democrat, Republican, you feel like you're actually doing the people's business and you're doing the right thing. So when we have days like this, it should be celebrated, they should be celebrated, and that's why we continue to do the work we do in public service and in government. So I'm going to take the liberty of speaking on behalf of my colleagues and say, I am grateful to have the privilege and the opportunity to serve as a representative in New York State government, and I think that feeling is shared by all of my colleagues. So to my Assembly and Senate colleagues, kudos and props to all of you for the work that you do and many of the things that we have to do as we look ahead. Yeah. So let me also, I want to thank NYU as well. This is one of the finest universities in the state, in the country, and in the world. And the work that gets done here is amazing. And while I haven't seen President Sexton in quite some time, I still got the proverbial hug, which he gives to everybody when he sees them. So it's nice to be here and be amongst friends. But today, I was thinking of some of the things that Assemblywoman Glick said. And now I feel somewhat like a little bit of a child in some respects. I barely got to see Congressman Rangel for many years. I see him twice in less than a week. Today is the first time I'm meeting Leader Pelosi. So I know how important they are, and I know how important the work is that they do. Having said that, I have the opportunity to assume a new role now as a Senate Majority Leader, and it is an incredible responsibility, but it's also an awesome opportunity. So I want to speak about one person who is not here because his yeoman-like effort on this issue and higher education issues has been something he's done for well over 30 years, and that's Senator Ken LaValle. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here today, but he has worked closely with Assemblywoman Glick, with the governor's staff, people like Alfonso David, and he started by doing roundtables and going around, bringing people in, advocates, listening to the issues, drilling down on this stuff. And when we discuss these issues and this issue in our conference, this is not easy stuff. It's just not. I mean, there are so many issues that are involved, involving intimacy, due process, the rights of individuals, the rights of universities, and how do you deal with all that stuff? And yet at the same time, I find myself saying, I'm almost embarrassed that we've had to have these discussions. Like, why wasn't this fixed a long time ago? Now I'm going to speak for a moment as a parent. I have 3 beautiful children, the eldest of whom is my daughter, Ashley. And when I think about these things, I'm no different than anyone else in the room. It's a very narrow prism. It's a focus that is based on love and affection and wanting to make sure that whether it's my kid or your kids, that they're safe, that they can go to college or to a public or a private university and enjoy the full collegiate experience without having to worry. Worry about grades, worry about other things, but don't have to worry about your safety. That's crazy. So what we've done here, I think, is fantastic. And the governor deserves extraordinary credit because New York is now stepping out in front as a leader again. This will be the benchmark. I would be remiss, though, if I didn't say the governor has a fantastic partner in our lieutenant governor who travels all around the state, works on a lot of issues, may not get the fanfare that the governor does, but she is in the trenches every single day doing fantastic work on behalf of the people of the state of New York. So, Lieutenant Governor. Deborah Glick mentioned this, Assemblywoman Glick mentioned this. One of the best things that's contained in this legislation is money, right? Everyone likes the money. That's really important for the state police, for the rape crisis centers. You can have all the greatest ideas in the world, but if we don't back it up with financing, it makes it almost impossible to achieve those goals. So that is something that people outside should really pay attention to. And frankly, I think that's going to grow on itself because the importance of these issues are not going to go away. And we have this fine young lady here who I have not had a chance to meet officially. I think to myself, I've been speaking in public for a very long period of time. How much courage and bravery does she have to be standing here amongst all of us? That takes guts, it takes moxie, it takes determination. So happy to see you here is fantastic. Now I'm going to close on this. I get to do 2 things at the same time. I get to say thank you and make an introduction. I get to say thank you to the governor of our great state, Governor Andrew Cuomo, and he and I have entered a new phase of our working relationship. And I'm going to say very nice things about him because he gets to speak after me. But I will say this. We have worked on a wide variety of issues in the last 6 weeks, and he is a fierce advocate. He's an admirable adversary as well, but all of you know that, anyone who works in the legislature, but I know this. He knows how to get things done. He knows how to put deals together and do the people's business, and there's no finer example of that than the issue that we're talking about today. So I could go on, but I'm just going to put it plain and simple. The governor has done a incredible job in this area. He started this, a lot of other people ran with it, and it came to closure, and we're able to stand here today with all of you because of his determination and his leadership. So, ladies and gentlemen, I give you our Governor, Andrew Cuomo.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Well, this is really a great day. And for those of us who are in government or follow government, sometimes you question, are you really getting something done? Is it worth all the aggravation? A day like today, you see the power of government. You see the power of government to actually change the way society lives and how we treat one another. First to NYU and President Sexton, we thank them very much for their hospitality to be here. To Senator John Flanagan, we had a very interesting legislative session, this session. It was different than most. It could have been a little mini-series, this legislative session. We started with one set of legislative leaders on the Democratic and Republican side, the Senate and the Assembly. And we ended with a different set of legislative leaders. And they changed at different times through the session. So it was really a sort of a roller coaster of a session. And we dealt with a lot of difficult issues, but at the end of the day, it was actually an extraordinary session in getting things done for the state of New York. And that is what it's all about at the end of the day. Did government make life better for people? Did government accomplish things that make the state a better state? And we did. And for that, we owe thanks to both the Democratic Assembly and the Republican Senate. Because if those two don't say yes, then you have nothing. And they both did on this bill, and let's give them a round of applause. They're here today. Let me say something about Senate Leader John Flanagan on this issue. We showed a movie in Albany called The Hunting Grounds, which is an extraordinary documentary that really publicized this issue and had survivors on this documentary talking about their story and showed how the institutions were slow to respond and some really offensive mindsets of young men who are on these college campuses and how they treated women. After the movie, Senator Flanagan said to me, you know, this is a complicated bill, and there's a reason why this hasn't happened. As he just said to you, there are privacy issues, intimacy issues, et cetera. He said, but I give you my word, we're going to figure out how to make this happen, because this should happen for my daughter, for your sister, for our sisters. This bill has to pass. New York has to lead the way. And he was true to his word. At the end of the day, this bill passed, and I want to publicly thank him. Senator John Flanagan. To Assemblymember Deborah Glick, who carried this on the Assembly side, I said to Leader Pelosi when we were backstage, I said, Deborah Glick is probably the original woman's crusader on so many progressive issues. We all look to her. Let's give her a round of applause, Assemblymember Deborah Glick. As you heard from the Senator, the Lieutenant Governor, Kathy Hochul, was all over the state building support. She did a fantastic job. Let's give her a round of applause. The Superintendent, Joseph D'Amico of the State Police, let's give him a round of applause. And to our special guest who is here today, who is a really Democratic superstar, more than a Democratic superstar. She's a federal official who gives hope, I think, on both sides of the aisle. And she's a special person to me. She's a special person to the Cuomos. We lost my father this year in January, and I've been thinking a lot about him as we went through the session and we went through all this tumult. And I kept wondering, what would he be thinking? What would he be doing now? And on the way here today, thinking that Democratic Leader Pelosi was going to be here, my father had a special relationship with Pelosi. My father was a very tough critic of other elected officials. He held himself to a very high standard, and he could be highly critical. He had very few elected officials who he said nice things about. Let's just say it that way. Publicly, he never said anything bad about most of them. Privately, though, was a different story. But he had a couple of heroes. And you'd go to his apartment on the east side, and we'd go over on Sundays, and we'd have the whole family there, and all the kids would be there. So there'd be like 25 people stuck in this little apartment, young kids screaming, running around. And he'd be on the couch watching C-SPAN, because he was a C-SPAN junkie, my father. And Congressman Rangel would come on C-SPAN, and he loved Congressman Rangel. And he would love to watch Congressman Rangel. And they went way back, and these were two of the great warriors who I watched as a young man. And I learned from as mentors. And they were on the same side. They'd be on different sides. But they were great warriors. And he would say about Congressman Rangel, he always calls them the way he sees them, Charlie. He always calls them the way he sees them, and that's true. And when Democratic leader Pelosi would come on the C-SPAN screen, everyone had to be quiet. Shh! Nancy's on. And you'd have to quiet down. All the kids and everyone would have to sit there and be quiet, and 4-year-olds would have to be quiet, because my father had such a profound respect and such an affection for Congresswoman Pelosi and what she's accomplished for this country, what she accomplished for women in her role in leadership, what she accomplished for us here, coming to stand with us when we announced this campus sexual assault bill. And she came here to bring attention to it, because she said at that time, if you can get it done in New York, boy, that'll be a great boost to getting it done nationwide. She left Washington, she came up here to stand with us on the introduction. Let's give her a New York welcome, Congresswoman. Give me 1 second. I'm going to make some more comments, then I'll bring you up. Let me make a couple of comments before she comes up. Today is a very important day. Why? Because of the statement we are making. And the statement is a very simple, clear, bold statement. And the statement is the state of New York acknowledges that we still discriminate against women. Now, that is a damning commentary when you think about it. And it's a very simple statement to make, but it's also very controversial to make. How can you say that we still discriminate against women? In New York, 2015? Because we do. That's why. Because sexism is alive and well. And discrimination is alive and well. And we discriminate against women in housing and in lending and employment. Women are 32 times less likely to be a CEO than a man. Women on average earn $11,000 less for a similar position than a man. They're twice as likely to wind up living in poverty. We discriminate against women. That's what the Women's Equality Act was all about. And that was the expression, Women's Equality Act, because women have not achieved full equality. And that's the statement we're making. The corollary to that statement is it's even worse in power relationships between men and women. We have a crisis in domestic violence. We don't want to acknowledge it. We're uncomfortable talking about it. But we have a frequency of domestic violence that is shameful. And lack of acknowledgement, and lack of accepting responsibility, and lack of solution. We have more fast food restaurants, more pet shelters than we have domestic violence shelters. Why? Because we're uncomfortable with the admission. I have a very simple philosophy. You will never solve a problem you're unwilling to admit. Denial is not a life strategy. And if you do not acknowledge the problem, you're going to live with it. And why is there still discrimination against women? Because we let it go on too long. Why is domestic violence still a problem? Because we let it go on too long. Why is this sexual assault on college campuses such a problem? Because we let it go on too long. Because we didn't acknowledge it, we were ashamed of it. One out of 5 young women who go to a college can expect to be a victim of sexual assault. 1 out of 5 women, according to the Washington Post and Kaiser Foundation. Just think about that. I have 3 daughters who are going to be in college next year. 1 out of 5 will be a victim of sexual assault. Only 5% are prosecuted or investigated by law enforcement. 5%. Only 15% go to a crisis center for counseling and help. Why? Because the problem is compounded by academic institutions that want to protect themselves, and it is not in their interest to publicize the situation. Universities spend a lot of money developing their brand, and they're advertising, and they're trying to attract people to come to their university, and it's very competitive. And they don't want a story in a newspaper that says, student at Acme University raped at a dorm party. They don't want that. I believe they have been unintentionally complicit in cloaking this problem and keeping this problem quiet. And all too often, and you'll hear this from survivors all across the country, they went to the school administration. The school administration wants to handle it as a school administrative matter, send them to a panel, talk to the professor, talk to the young man. Well, there's 2 sides to the story. Do you really want to do this? It's going to be messy. There's reputational damage. And that's why only 5% wind up going to the law enforcement. That's why only 15% wind up going to crisis. That's why out of 1 out of 5 children in going to college and being a victim, when was the last time you saw a story in a newspaper of a rape or of a sexual assault? How could it have that frequency and nobody know about it? Because we cloaked it, we camouflaged it, we didn't want to admit it. This law does the exact opposite. First, it says we admit the problem. We're ashamed of it, but we admit the problem, and that's the first step towards solving the problem. And then we pass the law that is the most aggressive law in the United States of America. And what it says is common sense. It says, number 1, affirmative consent. The other person has to say yes. They have to say yes. It's yes on both sides. Second, if there is a victim of a sexual assault or alleged sexual assault, that victim has rights, like the Miranda rights. You know how we have Miranda rights before you're arrested? In this case, every school official is going to read a victim of a sexual assault a set of rights. They have a right to a counselor. They have a right to have it investigated by campus police, or they have the right to go to law enforcement right now. Why is State Police Superintendent Joseph D'Amico here? And what do you see when you look at him? You see a handsome face, you see a funny hat. I know that. What else do you see? Well, first, by the way, you see the law enforcement agency that was the spearhead of taking and finding 2 escapees from Dannemora State Prison and returning them to justice. But then what you also see is a symbol that says assault and rape are crimes. They're not just not nice, unethical, immoral. They are crimes. And if you commit a crime, or you assault, or you rape someone in this state, it will be prosecuted and investigated as a crime, I promise you. And then, as Senator Flanagan and the Assembly member mentioned, we also have funding for crisis centers and counseling, so it is a full package. State police will have special investigative personnel. Crisis centers will be funded. Schools are going to have to inform victims of their rights. It's no longer an academic matter, and a woman isn't going to be made to feel guilty or complicit or fearful if she goes forward. She's going to have the right to counseling and an independent law enforcement agent from day one. I'm not going to allow the schools to cover it up anymore to protect their reputation. They allow young women to be victimized. Those days are over. And as Senator Flanagan said, yes, this is why we do what we do. This is why senators run for office and people run for the Assembly, to make life better, to help people, and that's what we're going to do. And I think when you do it in this state, you have a second opportunity to make an even more profound impact. Because, let me speak as an arrogant New Yorker now. When New York does something, people notice. I know there are a lot of states, and we love all the states. We really do. But New York is special. And when New York acts, and it's always been that way. When New York acts, people notice. And we have always been the progressive capital, taking the first step, pushing the edge of the envelope, and then the other states look at New York, the other leaders look at New York, and the question becomes, why can't you do that? We did it on gun control. We did it on marriage equality, where we went first. And we're going to do it right here today once again, where the question will flip. And now every school that's not in New York, the question is going to be, why don't you agree to the same code? Why don't you protect your students the way they protect the students in the schools in New York? Governor of every state, legislator of every state, why don't you do this? And Leader Pelosi can now go back to Washington and say, this is a national issue. It should be addressed federally. It can be done. They did it in New York, Republican Senate, Democratic Assembly. They came together, they passed the bill, used that as an example to protect women all across this nation. Ladies and gentlemen, if there's one woman who can do it, it is Leader Nancy Pelosi, a progressive voice, a progressive champion, someone we can all be proud of. I give you Congresswoman Leader Nancy Pelosi.
By now, is it afternoon? Good afternoon, everyone. May I be the first to take us into this next part of this great day. Majority Leader Flanagan said it's a day of celebration, a day to celebrate. The Assemblywoman said that it was an important day. The governor said it was a great day. It is a tipping point day, in my view. When the state of New York, in a bipartisan way, has come together to have so many members of the Assembly and the state Senate present here with the governor, with the lieutenant governor, with the president, we call them president in California, Majority Leader Flanagan here, and of course, with the great leadership of Deborah Glick. I'm here as a Democratic leader of the House of Representatives to say, on behalf of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, on both sides of the Capitol, thank you, New York, for setting an example, for being a model, for showing the way. Now, I say that as a Californian to governor. As you know, we passed legislation in California last fall, yes is yes, that had to be affirmative consent. But the New York law does us one better. It goes from enough is enough to a victim's Bill of Rights that separates it from the law that we passed, and an example for us to put some of that legislation in place there. 2 great states, 2 important pieces of legislation, 1 tremendous issue, which is really campus sexual assault is an all-hands-on-deck epidemic in America. Listening to the speakers, to the governor and to the president and, the majority leader and the state senate, and listening to Assemblywoman Glick, it's kind of emotional. You know, it's a kind of an emotional thing, hearing the majority leader talk about his family and the governor about his family. And I think about my family. I have 5 children, 4 of them born in Manhattan. 1 of them still lives here or has come back to live here, 4 of them daughters. And you think about, okay, let's hear it for the fact that I have New York bona fide. In fact, she lives in Greenwich Village. President Sexton, thank you again for your hospitality. But when you think about when your children are going away to college, it's a very emotional occasion. The empty nest, well, eventually with 5, eventually the empty nest. And you think of all the opportunity, the learning, the growth, the enjoyment of coming into their own. It's a glorious, glorious thing. And then when you think of what they might be challenged with when they get there. We never really thought about that in my day, either because of denial or because we just didn't know so much of what was going on. And now when I say in my day, even when my daughters went to college, now I'm getting ready for my grandchildren to go to college. So this is really important. I remember the first time I met Kathy Hochul. She was a candidate for Congress, and we were in Manhattan for an event for her, and she talked about this subject then as a candidate for Congress. And she talked about this subject with a marriage equality decal on her jacket. So she has been out there seeing the connection between issues that center around respect. The governor talked about the fact that the discrimination against women is widespread, not only campus violence, but domestic violence, and his sister, Maria Cuomo, has talked about this in her film about violence in the military as well. So it is out there, and we have to change that. And we can do it in an important way. We just saw, as we went into the 4th of July weekend, we saw 2 important Supreme Court decisions that were liberating, that were about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, a healthier life, the liberty to pursue your happiness with upholding the Affordable Care Act, and of course, the transformational decision, marriage equality. But this is about freedom too. It's about freedom for kids, young people to go to school, to learn, freedom to go to school, to grow, and not fear that they're going to not be safe, so when any threat to their safety or to their reputation. So I want to thank Abigail for her presence here today. There are all kinds of people who serve in the legislatures and in public affairs, committed to their values, dedicated to principles to make the future better. One important adjective is one that makes a big difference. And that adjective is everybody is committed and dedicated and hardworking and enthusiastic, who is courageous. And Abigail has demonstrated such great courage, and her courage has made a difference. Thank you, Abigail. So I'm honored to be here with my colleague, Charlie Rangel, a great leader in the Congress of the United States. He knows that this is an important issue for President Obama, that he has set up a White House task force to protect students from sexual assault, Not Alone, it is called. And the task force campaign is, it's on us, but it's all the same. Enough is enough. It's on us to make the difference. And to these young people, you are not alone. Joe Biden heads up that task force, and that's so appropriate because he was the author of the Violence Against Women Act in the 90s, and of course saw to its reauthorization 20 years later last year. So everybody, as I say, this has to be it's all hands on deck. So the governor challenges us, Charlie, to do something in Congress. From New York, Carolyn Maloney has been a leader on legislation to address this crisis, and we thank you for her leadership, Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney. We're not in her district, right? No, she's uptown. Uptown, is that what we would say? Yeah. That's what was said when I lived here, that would be uptown. And Representative Jackie Spear from California. So again, California and New York, such large states with such, shall we say, imagination on how to get things done. And that the results are what we are interested in. We can have a conversation all we want. We can talk about it forever, but that doesn't make the difference. It's good to bring it out into the open. It's better to act upon it. As the majority leader and the Speaker of the Assembly, we all know, I mean, we praise the governor for his leadership, whether it's marriage equality, whether it's gun safety, whether it's this issue. To get it done, it's important to have the courage of the members of the Assembly and the members of the State Senate. Right, Deputy Speaker, isn't that not correct? So we thank you all for your courage as well. So it is really an honor for me as a mom, as a grandmother, a personal honor for me to be here, but also as one who loves and respects New York, proud of the Cuomos. And I'll just close by saying what Mario Cuomo said when I was elected the first woman Speaker of the House. He said that Governor Cuomo's on the phone, so I pick up the phone. This was before Andrew was governor, so I knew which Governor Cuomo they meant. Pick up the phone and he says, if you're not Italian, you won't understand this. He says, Maron. Would that be what he would say? That's him. But in any event, it's a family affair because this is a family matter, and families do matter to our country. It is such a joy to be with all of you, and I extend the heartiest congratulations to each and every one of you, advocacy groups and all the rest who played such a role, and I'm here to also pay great tribute to Andrew Cuomo, the governor who got the job done. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Leader Pelosi. We now will ask the governor to step forward and sign the bill. And